Hey guys, welcome back to As a Man Thinketh on Yanasa TV. I've got to do these as I'm working because otherwise I'm never going to get my work done. But I wanted to talk about several states, Texas, Washington, and Oregon, that you got to watch out for when it comes to your livestock. In Washington, there's a bill on the table now. Granted, it has been kind of set aside for the remainder of the year. They had some arguments on it, but they are not going to get to it this year in this legislative session. But the bill would require the state to invest money in actually keeping track of the methane that comes from your cows. So they want to start tracking and analyzing the methane that comes from your cows. I wonder why they would want to do that. You and I both know why they'd want to do that. But you all have to admit, this is getting a bit ridiculous. They want to track the methane from cows. Now, you'll hear a lot of arguments about bison, and I bring this up because our movie, Native: The Prodigies of Nikon, should have at least the first part of the series out by the end of the summer. And in that first part, we talk about bison as a keystone species. And one of the conversations that I had with a real ecologist, somebody who has spent years out in the field, is the simple fact that bison emitted more methane than cows. And while the estimates of bison are around 30 million, they actually go up to 60 million, maybe even 100 million. And if you look at the migration of bison, I think this is where some confusion comes in. So a lot of people thought that bison migrated all the way across the United States and all the way back again, which is a total lie. That never actually happened. Well, it's not a lie, it's just people don't understand how the bison migration actually worked. It's more of a mosaic, right? You have a bunch of family units, they'd come together, and all of a sudden you'd have these massive, huge herds, and then they'd split back apart again. And as people traveled across west, some of the early explorers, it's not like they knew each bison by name, they would just notice that sometimes they'd see these massive herds, and sometimes they wouldn't see them at all, and so they just assumed that they were migrating across the entire continent. But that's not actually what was happening. So knowing that information, there was probably actually a lot more bison than that 30 million, which is why a lot of estimates today have gone as high as 60 million, maybe 100 million bison at one point in time. The other thing you have to remember is that going back throughout history, bison were much bigger. So the question that we had was what ecological damage was actually done when bison were removed for 30, 40 years before we had cows come back into the environment. Having all of that methane, all of that CO2 gas, which is essential, it's the gas of life, disappear for a period of time, it would have impacted plant growth. It would have impacted so many different things. I mean, these animals are part of the ecosystem. They actually created our ecosystem. So while cattle aren't the perfect surrogate to bison, they also produce these gases of life that we all have to have in order to grow food and survive and live. In fact, we look at other planets and we say, oh, look, that planet has similar gases to our planet. We might be able to live on it. But when it comes to our planet, we're like, oh, too many gases, can't live here anymore. So the Washington bill is complete BS. If you actually look at the number of cows in the United States, we're the lowest that we've been since the 1950s. And even when we came off our peak in the 1970s, emissions were still going up. But we're gonna blame it on the cows anyway. Just blame it on the cows because we don't want meat eaters. We want lab-grown, patented food products that our stock portfolios can make a lot of money off of. You know, sometimes I wonder what would we do without these elites to con everybody into buying stuff to make everybody else's 401k go up. I was driving through a local town the other day where there were some older people protesting, and they all had signs that said, take a look at your 401k now, thank Donald Trump. It worried me for a minute, and then I remembered something. I'm a farmer. I sold out of my 401k to start a farm 10 years ago. So some of you are probably wondering what the heck is going on in Oregon again, Charlie, because I talk about Oregon a lot on this channel. I did last year because, let's face it, Governor Kotek has a thing against farmers. They shut down a lot of farmers with that dairy issue last year, but eventually they came around. The thing that they never came around on was their watering issue for market gardens. Market gardeners, people selling at farmers markets. So there is actually a bill in Oregon right now. I believe it's one of those community-sponsored bills, but we all know that these organizations also pay Kotek a lot of money to run each year. So What they want to do is they want to create a climate bill of rights. They want to end the constitutional rights of the state to protect people against climate change. If they can shut down farms over pumping water to water their vegetable gardens, if they can change the definition of a CAFO to stop somebody with 4 milking cows from being able to milk their cows, just imagine what they're going to do when all of a sudden it becomes a constitutional right to protect the citizens from climate change. And like I said, none of this science actually adds up, but they're still going to push this narrative anyway. And they're going to be able to shut down farms across the state of Oregon because of this, quote, Bill of Rights in their Constitution. Washington has the same thing. Initially, they had excluded cows from that agenda. However, a lot of people would argue that the current bill to research and study and analyze methane gas coming from cows in order to come up with legislation is an attempt at taking it to the next level. So if I were in Oregon and I were in Washington and I had cows or I had any type of ruminant, I would be highly concerned about both of these bills because, man, they're going to get you on this stuff, all in the name of climate change. And what's funny about it is that all of these initiatives that you see from California to Oregon to Washington, they're all funded by the same guys who have invested a ton of money into these alternative protein sources. They just can't compete with the market, so they're just gonna have to shut down their competition, and then maybe people will wanna eat it when there's nothing else left but bugs. Okay, so some of you are probably wondering, why did I bring Texas into this conversation? And you know, I don't think that the state of Texas is what it used to be. I think there's been a lot of things going on over there. And as far as Abbott goes, you know, I recognize that he's done some good things and he's a nice guy, but actually I can't give him the nice guy credit because there has been so much human trafficking in that state under Abbott. To me, there's no excuse for it. Whatever the reason is, if you're a good human being, you would have stopped that a lot sooner. Whoever said farming would be fun should be put on trial. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's rewarding, but it is not fun. Anyway, so what exactly is happening out in Texas? I believe it is House Bill 147 and State Bill 503. What they want to do is require everybody to register their livestock so it's easier for the state to track. Now, I know we've been through the whole, you know, electronic tag thing. Still a lot of people that are out fighting to keep that from happening, but we fought a war against Europe to get away from their policies. And if there is one thing that I feel like we should have learned from watching Europe and the unelected officials in Brussels over the last several years is that once they have the information to track your animals, well, then they use it to take your animals. It's not a wise decision. And I understand, you know, the necessity, especially with all the diseases that keep popping up and tracking animals, tracing animals. But I also kind of feel like, you know, it's a bit of an overreach. Bit of a stretch to convince me that that's necessary. Well, I guess I'm halfway done. Still got a little bit of work to do today. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video and stay in touch.